everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be looking at three little zines that I got in the mail recently from our friend Matt Madden. Matt is beyond, on top of being a great cartoonist who can tell the story like straight through with no tricks, he really is one of the most interesting formalists in comics, I think, and someone who's constantly like innovating interesting constraints and games to play in comics. I've done reviews of some of Matt's other work as well. We should be talking to Matt pretty soon, so I wanted to get some more of his stuff out here for you all to see. But what I mean by constraints is he's always coming up with these rule systems that he has to then try and tell stories within. And that's fascinating to me. I've always liked clever little challenges like that, and I've always liked like hardcore formalist stuff. The danger with hardcore formalism is you're going to tell a story that doesn't add up to much. And I kind of just accept that going in. Like, we're trying something tricky, and if it can also be emotionally resonant, great. If not, like, the trick is usually interesting. And Matt oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes is able to do that thing where it's both pulling off a trick and telling a compelling story. And that, to me, is like the highest level type of stuff. So three of them, they all have got a different constraint. Some of them, it's fun to figure out the constraint too. I think Matt's pretty smart in that he'll usually like tell you the constraint at the end, so you have the fun of just reading the comic without that in mind, and then at the end you get it. So on this one, this is called Walker, and it's a bunch of one-page stories, and you get the sense over time that Matt is keeping the same 6 poses basically, and then putting in different backgrounds and context around those poses. Like this here, this looks like this running pose, you know. And so you start to get the sense as well that they're cycling in different ways. Like, you start out with the kind of natural walk, run, trip, fall, and then here you start with the fall. So that's fun. You kind of pick up on it, and he's coming up with really clever different ways. I when I'm looking at work like this, I'm always thinking, okay, like, how would I approach it, or try and reverse engineer how the artist approached solving the problem of the constraint. And here it looks to me like you probably just sketch the same little poses out in the order that you sketch them out, and then it's like, okay, what am I going to do with this? Fill in the background. I especially like here the willingness to put a bed over somebody. Like, here it's running, but here that figure's kind of like rustling around in bed. So that's clever, and it just, as the artist, it makes you think a lot. It makes you have to really work through a problem, and as the viewer, you can kind of work through that problem with the artist. So I think that's really, really cool. And like here, even realizing, okay, I can break the 6-panel grid and put like 2 of the poses in the same panel. Like, that's the kind of stuff that Matt just seems like relentlessly analytical about, like every possible variation of this, and I love that. Here though, he's taking this form. I don't think this was like a analytical relentless problem, actually, now that I flip the page, solution of the problem. But he's using a poetic form, a sestina. I've seen some other stuff like this that he showed me where he's using poetry forms to make comics. So here you have your poses. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then there's different preset ways that you have to mix those. So I guess that would be a rhyming structure normally. I think Matt takes a lot of this inspiration from poetry, from what I've gleaned in the messages. We've chatted on Instagram and email a bit, but I look forward to talking to him more about that influence, because I think it's interesting to bring out these outside constraints. I'm particularly interested in music, and this is encouraging me to think more about how I could take formalisms from music, and especially rhythm, and translate them into comics more deliberately and analytically. So that's cool. This one, I think, is a real success, in the sense that it's both a really fascinating formal constraint and an emotionally compelling book. So this, drawn onwards, you get a sense of right out from the gate what it is. That drawn onward, if you read it backwards, is drawn onward. So it's a palindrome. I've always been fascinated by palindromes, so immediately I'm like looking at this one and being like, oh yeah, I get it, like I'm excited about this. And then he tells this really awesome, I'm not going to give away the whole thing here, but he tells a really awesome story about these characters who kind of going through time in different ways, and they meet in the middle here. And I think that's great. I really love that this is where the staple went through too. I know that's probably not planned, but that they're bound together right here on the kiss is pretty interesting. It's just smart, good cartooning, good storytelling. Yeah, and if you flip through the book, you'll see. I don't want to flip through the first and last page, but you'll see that it's like the same compositions reversed. I tried reading the book backwards, and that to me the dialogue didn't read as well. I didn't because there's a suggestion that you should reread the whole thing backwards, but I wasn't sure if I was supposed to read page by page backwards or panel by panel backwards. It didn't seem to work as good, but I got the point anyways. Like I could play the story back in my head as these people's stories cross. This reminds me a lot of my favorite novelist Mark Danielowski's book Only Revolutions, where it's a love story of two characters that like come together, fall in love, and like they kind of, I don't want to say fall apart, but their story like crosses each other through the book. And in Only Revolutions, it's like this on each page, as well as like a flip book with a lot of other strange formal constraints, but still being an amazingly impactful piece of emotions too. So I think Matt Madden's like, the closest to a Danielowski that we have in comics. And I really, really appreciate that. And then this one is just so fun. I've got to do this. I've got to do this with my students. I'm probably going to appropriate this assignment for my art appreciation classes. I'm going to try it at some point in time. So this is a comics game that Matt and Tom Hart came up with. And they have their first two that they made, and then they've curated. Matt has curated and edited together examples of other artists playing this game, and I want to play this so bad. This looks like so much fun. So basically, you're playing tic-tac-toe with a comic, and you assign one artist an X and one artist an O. Now, I guess you could probably do this without the X's and O's. That's an extra, no pun intended, formal constraint on top of it that. And or both probably, if you're being really, like, the more constraints you put on it, the more clever you have to be, right? So you could take constraints off. You could just be like, okay, well, I'm going to start my panel here, and then you put a panel here, and then I put a panel here, and you could just try and tell a story that way, and then what you're left with is almost like the comics equivalent of animation. Like, here's this and this, now we got to figure out, like, how to get from here to here. So that in and of itself is already fun and interesting to me, and I'd love to play that game. But also assigning an O and an X so that the audience can reverse engineer who did what out of it, I think is really cool. So you can see that the artists are either including an X in the composition very dynamically or in the dialogue. And in Tom and Matt's case, and in all of these ones, actually, they're doing that. So compositionally, we'll have an O in it, and then be olive. Or like, oh, right here, here's a big O. And then here you have X's, Xavier, XXX, Xanthem, Xanax, but there oftentimes will be an X or like here, it's in Professor X, but he's also crossing the things. So that I think is really cool as well, because you've got like 3 or 4 different problems to solve. These ones, of course, they're one-page things. There's all these constraints put on it, so you're probably not going to get the comic that like really sticks with you and changes your life or whatever. But man, what a fun game! What a fun collaborative game this is. So on the back, they've got it set up where you can actually play it on the book. Matt, I'm so stealing this for my classes, and I can't wait to do it myself. And I really appreciate that someone like Matt is out here. It's like Scott McCloud putting out the idea of the 24-hour comic. There's no, I've already told him, like, I'm going to steal that for a class. He says, please do. There's no sense of, like, ownership over the trick here. Even the book itself is just, like, a whole bunch of other artists playing it. And I love that idea that you're contributing a new challenge to the medium. And then for someone like Matt, who's just kind of relentlessly innovating all these things and coming up with a great one and then just moving on, it's almost like he's leaving ideas for someone else to take, and then like, can you make a whole book that's made this way that is, as good and emotionally resonant as this, or will Matt cycle back to it? But just that willingness, like, I've got so many ideas that, like, screw it, you can take it, and if you perfect it and make it better than me, great. Like, no no harm done. I love that kind of ethic too. Like, that's what's so cool about comics to me. I mean, among a million other things that I love, but I've always really liked collaborating. I like that aspect of comics, and I actually have a harder time like getting my energy up to go finish something that's just entirely my own. That collaborative process is really engaging to me. So there's a lot of that built into these works, and I even feel like reading Matt's works, there's that collaborative element where he's like spitballing with me. He's like, "Here's a cool idea, man. Like, what would you do with it?" I feel like that. I feel like Matt's comics are always starting the conversation, but they're opening up to me that like I can join in, and that's really cool as well. So thanks, Matt, so much for sending these over. I really appreciate it. I'll put a link down so hopefully people can go find these on Matt's website and get copies of their own. And if you play, I would love to see all of our viewers like play this game and then tag us and Matt on Instagram, like at us, at Living the Line Publishing, at me, Carson Grubaugh, at Matt Madden, hashtag tic-tac-toe comics. Like, I'd love to see a bunch of these, man. Like, let's take Matt's idea and blow it up. Yeah, so these are cool. I love it. Thanks, Matt, for sending these over. If you enjoy what we're doing here on the channel and you want to see more videos like this, the best way to support us is to support our Patreon. That gives us some extra spending money to get a lot of the books that we review. And then the best thing that you can do is support what Sean's doing with Living the Line Publishing. So we'll take a look at a couple of those books that he has out now that you could get. Centralia is an awesome, gorgeous comic by rising Dutch star Neil Van Peet. This is his first work. It's a really great sci-fi story. There's a world in the future where the sun has gotten so hot that people can't be on the ground, so they have to run around. There's a lot of conceits that go with that. What is the world that looks like? And I think you can see by the art that Sean's description of this book as like a Moebius for young adults, a YA Moebius, is a really great description of this really gorgeous and like wild, wacky, fun book. Thanks for following along. Take it away, Jack.
You want to see all these books? Smash that subscribe button and the like button and the bell, and then you get them.